In Pennsylvania, the night manager of a fast food restaurant is found brutally murdered, the apparent victim of a robbery gone bad. For 15 years, police are unable to identify a suspect. But then, an elite group of forensic experts agree to take on the case. A man disappears from his Lubbock, Texas home. All indications point to foul play. But until police can find the victim's body, they are powerless to prove murder. When the trail of clues stops, homicide investigators are often left with few options. But an elite group of forensic experts, known as the Vidocq Society, can heat up a cold case and apply their expertise to deliver collective justice. On February 4th, 1984, in the Philadelphia suburb of Falls Township, Pennsylvania, the manager of a fast food restaurant arrived for the early morning shift. He was alarmed to find that the front door was unlocked. Recently, there had been a string of robberies in the area. Nothing appeared to be missing. But in the kitchen, he discovered the night manager, Terry Brooks, lying on the floor. She had been brutally murdered. Within minutes, officers and forensic technicians from the Falls Township Police Department arrived at the scene. They found the 25-year-old victim lying face up on the kitchen floor. A large knife jutted out of her throat. A plastic trash bag had been used to cover her face. Judging by the coat she was wearing, it appeared Terry Brooks was preparing to leave for the evening. In the restaurant office, police found that the cash drawers and money bags had been cleaned out. The victim's shoes were found lying by the desk. Though this was just one of several restaurants to be robbed within a few months, it was the first to end in murder. Technicians searched for any clues to the killer's identity. They found nothing. No signs of a forced entry were found around the unlocked front door. Based on the evidence, police theorized that after Terry Brooks left the restaurant, she was ambushed by the robber and then forced back inside. Her death had been a violent one. Terry Brooks had been beaten, strangled, and then stabbed in the throat. She had been dead several hours. Hair and skin scrapings were found in the victim's hands and fingernails, indicating she had put up a fierce struggle. But in the days before DNA testing was available, examiners could only conclude that the samples had not come from the victim. Looking for any clue to help them identify a suspect, investigators interviewed the victim's parents. Terry, they said, was a cheerful young woman who made friends easily. She had put herself through college and worked hard, hoping to own her own restaurant one day. Recently, she had quit her job as a waitress for a better opportunity as the manager of the fast food restaurant.
Hey, babe. What brings you here?
She had just gotten engaged to a co-worker from her previous place of employment. Though Terry was living at home, her parents didn't know her fiancé very well. The engagement had been sudden. They couldn't think of anyone who might want to hurt their daughter. Terry's fiancé, 22-year-old Scott Keefe, also had no idea who could have committed such a brutal act. On the night of the murder, he was home sleeping. He had to be up early the next day. Around 6 a.m. the following morning, he drove by her house on his way to work. He knew Terry had worked late, and he wanted to be certain she had arrived home safely. When he noticed her car wasn't in the driveway, he became concerned and woke up her parents.
Hey, Mr. Brooks. How's it going?
What are you doing here, honey?
When they discovered Terry had not been home, they called the restaurant. That's when they learned she had been murdered. Though robbery appeared to be the motive behind the murder, police returned to the restaurant to speak with the manager. They collected all of the employee files, looking for evidence that the killer may have been a disgruntled employee. The manager could think of no one on his staff that had a problem with him or Terry. Everything suggested that Terry Brooks had been a random target. And for police, those are the toughest cases to solve. Desperate to generate a lead, examiners scrutinized all of the evidence collected from the crime scene. They were in luck. A single latent fingerprint was found on the trash bag that covered the victim's face. It was matched to one of Terry Brooks's co-workers at the restaurant.
Ma'am,
Detectives brought in the employee for questioning and to give blood and hair samples.
explain why it was there.
But she didn't seem capable of the violence inflicted on Terry Brooks. And the employee had an explanation for the print. Before leaving on the night of the murder, she had replaced all of the trash can liners. She said that she hadn't noticed anything unusual that night.
We were told that you were supposed to...
However, she did recall an incident a few days earlier. Near closing time, two men came into the restaurant. They appeared drunk and were causing trouble.
Yeah, let me get a cheeseburger.
The employee called her manager. Terry tried unsuccessfully to defuse the situation. When she threatened to call the police, the men became verbally abusive. They made several threats before leaving. The employee didn't know the men and hadn't seen them since that night. Police finally had their first big break in the case. Now they needed to identify the killers before they struck again. Several area store owners had similar encounters with individuals who fit the description of the two men. But no one seemed to know who they were or where they could be found. The identity of the prime suspects in Terry's murder continued to elude police. Soon, the investigation into her murder turned cold. And it would remain that way for the next 14 years. After 14 years, it seemed that the 1984 murder of 25-year-old restaurant manager Terry Brooks would never be solved. But in 1998, police in Falls Township, Pennsylvania, decided to re-examine all of the unsolved homicides in their jurisdiction. Detective Sergeant Wynn Cloud came across the Terry Brooks case file.
There was a lot of physical evidence available, and I examined all that, and it was all good physical evidence and preserved well. I believe that this had a very high solvability.
Sergeant Cloud enlisted the aid of Homicide Detective Nelson Whitney and Deputy District Attorney Lori Markle. After reviewing the case files, the team found a hole in the investigation conducted more than a decade earlier.
At that time, there were several fast food restaurant robberies that were occurring in this area, and the investigation conducted in the 80s had really focused on that idea. So we decided that in addition to looking at the possibility that the murder was a robbery homicide, we would also learn more about Terry and investigate the possibility that the murderer had been someone who knew her.
Investigators tracked down the people who knew Terry and her habits well. They located her former manager. When he viewed the crime scene photos for the first time, one in particular caught his attention. Detective Nelson Whitney explains.
So one of the things that Terry would do every day would be to clean out the ashes out of the ashtray and place it in a little ledge above the desk. She would close the ledger on the desk. She would put the phone in a certain position, put the ruler and the calculator away. The photograph of the desk from the crime scene clearly showed that the ashtray was in the middle of the desk, that it had ashes in it. There was an open book there, a ruler was out, a calculator was out.
Terry was also known to kick off her shoes when she did desk work. The information was at odds with previous suspicions that Terry was accosted outside the restaurant and then forced back inside.
We don't know where the light control is.
And that opened up the possibility that she knew her killer and had even let him inside the store.
She unlocks it. She opens the safe at some point whether she was...
But so far, that was only a theory, and one that put investigators no closer to identifying Terry Brooks's killer. Police needed more help. For that, they turned to an elite crime-solving team headquartered just a few miles away in Philadelphia. There, in the historic Downtown Club building, some of the greatest criminal theorists had been meeting every other month since 1990. This is the home of the Vidocq Society, a non-profit private brain trust of the nation's most esteemed law enforcement officials, forensics experts, psychologists, and government agents. Dick Laventhal is the Director of Communications for the Vidocq Society.
The society is named after Eugene Francois Vidocq, Frenchman that lived from 1775 to 1852. We credit him with being the father of modern-day detective practice. He's truly our inspiration. He's a man that thought out of the box. He was the first detective who began to keep files and records on criminals' methods of operations.
The society is limited to 82 full-time members, one for each year of Vidocq's life. Originally, they assembled to discuss historical cases and mysterious unsolved crimes. That soon changed.
Very quickly, we segued into an organization whose reason for existence was to look into unsolved homicides and try to solve the anguish of families when there's a loved one who's been murdered.
To have an unsolved homicide accepted by the Vidocq Society, investigators must first present their case to its members. At the next Vidocq gathering, Sergeant Cloud did just that.
I presented this on a factual nature. I did not give any theories, so I wouldn't taint any of their opinions. Everything I gave them were what facts I gathered from the case, from the crime scene. And after I was done presenting to them, I was approached by probably 30 members, possibly even more, but 30 that were real interested in it.
Vidocq Society co-founder Richard Walter offered to donate his expertise to the case.
My area is crime assessment and profiling. And basically, crime assessment is the act of looking at the crime scene, what's there as well as what's not there at that crime scene. Then taking that information and reconciling that with known patterns of behavior that we know in terms of criminal activity. So we know a great deal about the offender from the crime scene.
For Walter, the violence observed in photographs suggested the killer was motivated by vengeance or anger, not money. Walter believed that the killer was someone close to the victim, and the robbery was staged to throw investigators off his trail. From the lack of organization observed at the crime scene, Detective Cloud also learned that the killer likely had little more than a high school education. He probably worked as a menial laborer, perhaps a cook at a pizza or hamburger joint. Because of his rage, experts theorized he likely had difficulty maintaining relationships with women. Investigators turned to the victim's parents, hopeful they could identify someone who resembled the profile. Terry's father was dying of liver disease. The couple didn't know anyone who resembled the profile. However, they recalled that on the morning of the murder, Terry's fiancé, Scott Keefe, had acted strangely. Though Keefe appeared upset to learn his fiancée had been murdered, he refused to go to the hospital to help identify the victim. He said he didn't want to be late for work. For Terry's parents, Scott's actions that morning had always led them to believe he was hiding something. Police agreed. To find out what that was, investigators interviewed Terry's old friends. None spoke highly of Scott. They were all surprised to learn Terry was engaged to him. Scott was possessive and jealous, and he was in financial trouble that allegedly resulted from a drug problem. Things became more strained when Terry took a pay cut to manage the fast food restaurant. Just before she was murdered, Terry had talked about ending the engagement. Based on the information, Detective Cloud began delving into Scott Keefe's background. What he found was an uncanny parallel to the psychological portrait generated by Vidocq Society experts, right down to his job.
Our ultimate suspect worked at a pizza joint, had been for years. He had several relationships, personal relationships, but they were very rocky.
With the help of the Vidocq Society, investigators had finally identified a suspect in the 15-year-old slaying of Terry Brooks. Now it was up to Falls Township Police to prove it. With the help of the Vidocq Society, an elite non-profit group of law enforcement officials, police in Falls Township, Pennsylvania had finally identified a suspect in the 1984 murder of Terry Brooks. Now, investigators turned to physical evidence collected nearly 15 years earlier to prove it. The biological evidence collected at the time of the autopsy was forwarded to the nearby drug scan laboratory. There, new DNA technology, unheard of at the time of the murder, had become a sophisticated crime-solving tool. Forensic scientist Diane Marshall examined the evidence. The samples had been carefully stored, and DNA is very stable over time. Genetic tests revealed that the skin found under Terry's fingernails had not originated from her. Marshall looked for DNA samples on the murder weapon to see if she could produce a match. But after so much time, it appeared that no traces of blood remained.
And I took apart the knife where the blade actually joined into the wooden handle, and I was digging around there with a scalpel, a clean scalpel, and I removed like really this crusty old material that was in there. And then I did process that specimen for DNA. I determined that there was 2 different DNA types there, one which matched the victim and one which matched an unknown suspect. And that DNA type from the suspect was the same that it was recovered under the fingernails.
Investigators had finally uncovered evidence that could link a suspect to the murder. Though all the circumstantial evidence was pointing to Scott Keefe, they didn't have the proof needed to obtain his DNA samples.
Trash company from Worcester.
They would have to find another way to get the evidence they needed. Detective Whitney suggested they focus on his trash. Once trash has been placed on the curb, it is considered abandoned property in the eyes of the law. Police can legally examine and collect its contents. On trash day, investigators arranged for a garbage truck to make only one pickup: the trash in front of Scott Keefe's house. A few blocks away, police took possession of the garbage and hand-delivered it to the crime lab. Hoping to find something that contained DNA samples, Diane Marshall zeroed in on several cigarette butts recovered from the trash.
When one smokes a cigarette, one deposits their saliva on the filter. Included in that saliva are epithelial cells, which come from the lining of your mouth.
Marshall successfully extracted cellular material from 2 different brands of cigarette butts found among the debris.
So I isolated the DNA from the saliva deposited on the filters of each of the brands of the cigarettes. And I noticed that one particular brand had one specific DNA type. It did not match any of the evidence from the crime scene.
But DNA from the second brand did.
Said it was okay.
On the 15th anniversary of Terry Brooks's murder, Scott Keefe was brought in for questioning and to provide blood samples. According to Detective Nelson Whitney, he never realized he was a suspect.
We told him that he was an important witness, that he was, because of his close relationship with our victim, someone who can give us information that no one else could, that would help us in our case, and he was only too happy to help.
After answering a few questions, detectives asked if he would mind taking a polygraph test as a matter of routine. Keefe agreed. The blood samples were rushed to the lab.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Well, Polly, control these trash.
Hours later, while awaiting the DNA tests, Vidocq Society co-founder Bill Fleischer carefully reviewed the polygraph results.
The polygraph records these physiological changes as part of our individual defense mechanisms, known commonly as fight-flight. In a polygraph situation, we ask questions. If those questions pose a threat to your well-being because you lie to them and there's the fear of being detected in the lie, your body immediately reacts physiologically. Heart starts to beat faster. Blood's redirected to different organs in your body. Your mouth gets dry, your knees get weak, the butterfly in the stomach, your palms get sweaty.
Though the suspect denied any involvement in Terry's murder, Fleischer concluded that Scott Keefe was being deceptive. Now, examiners looked to scientifically verify that Keefe was a murderer. When his DNA samples were compared to those recovered from the victim, examiners found a match. Police confronted the suspect with the test results. Scott Keefe had no choice but to confess. Keefe stated that he often stayed with his fiancée at the restaurant when she was working late. On the night of February 4th, 1984, Terry Brooks decided to end their engagement. Keefe flew into a rage and killed her. He then staged the scene to make it appear that the murder was the result of a robbery gone bad. After so much time, the victim's family finally had answers. Deputy District Attorney Lori Markle.
Terry Brooks's family had to live for 15 years with not knowing who had killed her or seeing that person face any measure of justice. It meant a great deal to be able to, on the morning of February 5th, 1999, go to Mr. and Mrs. Brooks and say, "We've arrested the person who killed your child. He's in custody. We've amassed considerable physical evidence against him, and he's confessed."
Scott Keefe pled guilty to murder and was sentenced to life in prison. In the Terry Brooks case, a misleading crime scene led investigators to some wrong conclusions. But in some cases, detectives face a more daunting set of circumstances. No crime scene at all. On Sunday, May 19th, 1991, Jim Dunn and his wife received a late-night call at their Yardley, Pennsylvania home. The caller identified herself as Alicia Hamilton, the girlfriend of the Dunn's 24-year-old son, Scott. Upset, Alicia said Scott had disappeared from their Lubbock, Texas home. Jim told Alicia not to worry. He was expecting a call from Scott any day. But Scott never called. And Jim Dunn's attempts to reach his son were unsuccessful. Though concerned, he knew that Scott was probably busy with his hobby, buying and restoring cars.
Yes, it is. Dale, this is Jim Dunn, Scott's father.
I hadn't talked to Scott in about a week, and we'd been talking. We all usually talked at least once a week, and of course Scott was always had some kind of a project going. He was looking for money to help him buy a new car or buy a new body for a car so he could change the motors from one to the other.
But after a few days passed with no word, Jim Dunn contacted his son's boss at a car stereo installation company in Lubbock, Texas. The boss said Scott hadn't shown up for work in several days. When he last saw him, Scott hadn't been feeling well and asked to leave work early. He left his tools and his car at work and had his girlfriend, Alicia Hamilton, come pick him up. Scott said he hoped to be back at work in a few days. The boss told Jim Dunn that Alicia Hamilton called the shop a few days later. She believed Scott had left her for another woman. But Scott's father didn't believe his son would simply abandon his prized cars. He contacted Lubbock police to report his son missing. But there was little investigators could do. As an adult, Scott Dunn had the right to be missing. More importantly, there was no proof that a crime had taken place. Still, Detective Tal English agreed to look into the case.
He basically told me how unusual it was for Scott to be gone at all, just to disappear like this. And Two things that he was really concerned about that concerned him was he had left his tools at his work, and he had left his car there, and had not taken either one. Those two items were extremely important to him, and Jim knew that he wouldn't just leave that.
Later that evening, detectives contacted Scott's live-in girlfriend, Alicia Hamilton. She had last seen him just hours before he disappeared. She said she brought Scott home from work after he complained of feeling sick. She put him in bed and made him some tea. She wanted to stay and take care of him, but Alicia was already late for her waitressing job. Scott insisted that she go. Alicia said goodbye and went off to work. She hadn't seen him since. Though she had no idea where Scott had gone, Alicia had discovered something unusual. While rearranging the furniture, she found that a piece of carpet underneath the sofa had been neatly cut out. Unsure of the significance, investigators asked to look around the residence. In the bedroom, they found the missing piece of carpet. It had been duct taped to the floor and was covering a bare patch of the rug.
No idea.
Alicia hadn't noticed it before. Underneath the patched carpet, investigators noticed large reddish-brown stains. They appeared to be blood.
When we saw that it looked like a crime scene, we kind of backed up. That's when our identification section was called in. They came out, and we wanted them to photograph the scene prior to actually anything being moved.
Tests confirmed that the stains were human blood. Though it was unclear if the blood had originated from missing 24-year-old Scott Dunn, the finding indicated that something violent had happened inside that bedroom. A concerned father's intuition had exposed a possible homicide. While looking for answers in the disappearance of 24-year-old Scott Dunn, police in Lubbock, Texas made a troubling discovery. In the master bedroom of the apartment the young man shared with his girlfriend, detectives discovered bloodstains underneath a section of carpet. Authorities scoured the room for more evidence. Under a light source, technicians found copious amounts of blood throughout the room. On the walls and ceiling, they found smears and streaks of more blood. It was a telltale sign that someone had tried to clean up evidence of a brutal crime. Blood samples, carpet fibers, and the duct tape from the bottom of the carpet were collected. They also retrieved Scott Dunn's hairbrush for possible DNA samples. At the crime lab, examiners successfully generated Scott Dunn's DNA profile from hairs collected from his brush. When that was compared to the ones extracted from all the blood evidence, they found a match. For Detective Tal English, there was no doubt Scott Dunn had met with foul play. But the investigation was about to face a crushing setback. Prosecutors wouldn't touch the case.
According to the district attorney's office, Texas law required a body to actually open a homicide investigation, and we didn't have that. We had evidence indicating that there was probably one that occurred, but without that body, it was going to be difficult to actually open it.
Texas authorities intensified their search for proof that Scott Dunn had been murdered. His girlfriend, Alicia Hamilton, was questioned again. Though she couldn't explain the blood evidence, Alicia remained convinced Scott had run off with another woman. As the questioning continued, however, she thought of something else. She and Scott had been having problems with a neighbor, a man named Tim Smith. According to Alicia, Tim had been harassing her in recent weeks. Alicia said she met Tim at a local nightclub a few months back. She admitted that she began dating him outside of her relationship with Scott. When she realized the mistake she had made, she tried to break it off with Tim. But he couldn't seem to let go. He began to follow her and would show up at the apartment she shared with Scott.
Sure everything's okay?
She tried, according to her, to distance herself from him. Tim wouldn't let that happen. He lived in the same apartment complex at an apartment that was further down from where their apartment was, and was hanging around a lot, and she just couldn't get rid of him.
Though authorities didn't officially have a crime, they now had a potential suspect. Before looking closer at Tim Smith, however, they first needed to rule out that Scott had left town with another woman. Investigators tracked down a woman who had been spending a lot of time with Scott prior to his disappearance. She admitted she and Scott had become close friends, but nothing more. Just before he disappeared, Scott told her that he wanted to end his relationship with Alicia. But he admitted to being nervous about the confrontation. Alicia's ex-boyfriends had warned Scott she was controlling and abusive. One stated she was constantly looking for proof that he was being unfaithful. Something as innocent as a greeting card from an old friend would set Alicia off into a jealous rage. She threatened her old boyfriends with physical violence, and sometimes she tried to make good on those threats. Scott feared how Alicia would react to the news that the relationship was over. Alicia Hamilton wasn't the caring and concerned girlfriend she had presented herself as being. But that hardly proved she had anything to do with Scott's disappearance. Police paid a visit to Tim Smith, the man Alicia claimed had been harassing her and Scott. He was in the process of packing up his apartment. When detectives asked where he was going, he gave a startling answer. He and Alicia Hamilton had just bought a place and were moving in together. Tim Smith denied any involvement in Scott Dunn's disappearance. Then, officers noticed a roll of duct tape. It appeared similar to the tape found in Scott Dunn's bedroom. At the Lubbock Police Department Crime Lab, criminalist Scott Williams compared the tape found at Tim Smith's apartment against the tape found in Scott Dunn's bedroom.
We look at the physical characteristics. This would include looking at the color, the texture, any type of embossing on the duct tape. And of course, in duct tape, there are fibers or strands running through the duct tape. We look at the spacing and what those fibers are made of.
All of the characteristics matched. Next, the chemical composition of the adhesive was analyzed. The two samples were identical in every way. And there was something else.
I noticed on the side of the roll of duct tape that there was fibers and hairs adhered to the side. I asked David Young, a person who does our hair analysis, to determine if these could have had some other common origin in the case.
Trace evidence examiner David Young compared the hairs on the roll of duct tape found in Tim Smith's apartment with ones from Scott Dunn's hairbrush. He found one consistency after another.
It basically tells us that at some point in time, Scott Dunn was around that roll of duct tape, and therefore, since we linked the duct tape to the part of the crime scene, it helped put Scott Dunn with that roll of duct tape that was possibly at the crime scene as well.
Police now had a physical link between the possible crime scene and Tim Smith's apartment. Tim Smith was now the prime suspect in a missing persons case, and his relationship with Alicia Hamilton could not be ignored. But Scott Dunn's fate remained a mystery. Until authorities could produce his body, they would be unable to prove murder. Police in Lubbock, Texas suspected that missing 24-year-old Scott Dunn had been murdered. His girlfriend, Alicia Hamilton, and a man named Tim Smith were emerging as the prime suspects. But without the victim's body, they were unable to prove that harm had come to Scott Dunn. The case threatened to go cold. But Scott's father, Jim Dunn, refused to let his son's case slip away.
I'd continued to press the issue and for almost a year, and was trying to find out as much as I could about Alicia Hamilton, who she was. And also then the case had just actually had stalled because the district attorney, I'd spoken to him a couple of times, and he said, "Dunn, I don't know why you're calling me." He said, "You don't even have a body. You don't have a crime." He said, "It's just a missing person."
Determined to find justice for his son, Jim Dunn traveled to Albuquerque, New Mexico, Alicia Hamilton's hometown. He began digging into her past, looking for anything that could demonstrate she was capable of murder. He found nothing. He prepared to return home to Pennsylvania, empty-handed.
I came back to the hotel. I just relaxed and was kind of beaten down from not really finding out anything that would really help me that much, and flipped on the television set and just caught the very end of a TV show. Here was these detectives and a whole group of people called the Vidocq Society investigating unsolved homicides. And I said, my goodness, those people are right in Philadelphia, which is like 25 miles from where I live. I was in Texas.
Jim Dunn contacted the group. Members of the Vidocq Society invited him to present the case at their upcoming gathering. After the presentation was finished, Vidocq Society co-founder Bill Fleischer spoke one-on-one with Jim Dunn.
You could see that he was beside himself, that he was a distraught father. He definitely believed that his son had been murdered. He felt that Alicia Hamilton was involved in some manner in Scott's disappearance and murder. And he was looking for help. He was a human being that was in need of help from professionals.
Authorities realized they had to first prove that a murder had taken place. Without a body, that would not be easy. Vidocq Society members turned to renowned crime scene reconstruction expert Tom Bevel for help.
Crime scene reconstruction is especially useful in cases, for example, where you don't have a body, where there's a question as to what might have taken place. Do we just have a person with a minor bleeding wound that has left on their own power, or do we have a case in which there's a serious injury, such as possibly death?
For answers, Bevel needed to determine what type of object had caused the blood spatter patterns found in Scott Dunn's bedroom. Though most of the bloodstains had been smeared in an attempt to clean up the scene, some cast-off patterns remained intact. Using an object coated with blood, he was able to recreate the size and shape of the stains observed at the crime scene. They were consistent with having been caused by a blunt object like a bat or a pipe. Having established that Scott Dunn was violently beaten, Bevel next looked to determine if the 24-year-old could have survived such an assault. For that, he would need to establish how much blood had been shed. He poured blood onto a similar piece of carpeting until the dimensions of the stains matched the ones found on the floor of Scott Dunn's bedroom. He concluded that no one could have survived the amount of blood loss necessary to replicate all of the stains. When presented with the findings, prosecutors finally agreed to take on the case. Vidocq Society experts had helped transform a missing persons case into a homicide investigation. It was the break Lubbock police had been waiting for. Now, investigators focused on finding evidence that could physically link Alicia Hamilton and Tim Smith to the murder. They began reviewing files for anything they might have overlooked. They found something. Some of the hairs recovered from the duct tape found at the crime scene had not originated from Scott Dunn. Tim Smith was brought in for questioning the following day. He continued to deny any involvement, and, eager to cooperate, he provided police with a hair sample. Alicia Hamilton provided one as well. Examiners compared the samples taken from Tim Smith and Alicia Hamilton to the unidentified hairs collected from the blood-stained duct tape found in Scott Dunn's bedroom. Examiners concluded that the unidentified hairs had originated from the two suspects. For authorities, the findings provided enough evidence to arrest Alicia Hamilton and Tim Smith. The couple, currently living together, were taken into custody and charged with murder. Investigators believe that when Scott Dunn tried to end his relationship with Alicia, she became enraged. Unable to handle the rejection, she lashed out and beat the young man to death. Police believe she then turned to her other boyfriend, Tim Smith, for help in cleaning up the scene and disposing of Scott's body. A jury found Alicia Hamilton guilty of murder and sentenced her to 20 years in prison. Tim Smith was also found guilty of murder. He received 10 years probation. Scott Dunn's body has never been found. His father, Jim Dunn, was asked to join the Vidocq Society to help the parents of murdered victims. He agreed.
And because of my involvement there, I think as a result of being involved with the Vidocq Society and being actually a member of the Vidocq Society, that I can return a little bit and give them thanks in a different way, and at the same time maybe help someone else that was in the same position I was 10 years ago when Scott was murdered.
The Vidocq Society says its only client is truth. In that respect, they are no different from the law enforcement and forensics experts they help out. But when killers are cunning and the truth is elusive, Vidocq Society experts provide the new perspective to bring cold cases back from the brink. An unidentified man lies dead on the sidewalks of South Central Los Angeles. Who he is and how he died are questions investigators need answered. Not far away, a young mother is discovered dead in her apartment. Investigators struggle to make sense of the clues left behind. These are just 2 of the 164 people who die in Los Angeles County every day. When a death is suspicious, it is the LA County Coroner's Office that gets the answers for law enforcement and brings closure to families. Coroner investigators confront death every day, piecing together fragmented clues. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Time of death.
The first responders of forensic science are the coroner investigators. Some of the names in this program have been changed to protect the identities of the victims and the privacy of their families. 9:50 p.m., Los Angeles County Sheriffs responded to a shots fired call. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They treated a seriously wounded man lying on the street. Their efforts were not successful.
31 William to King Control.
Julie Wilson is a coroner investigator for the County of Los Angeles.
15-20 minute ETA. 10-4. 31 William clear.
When most are asleep, Julie's day is just beginning. She may see as many as 3 cases during her 10-hour shift.
We're being dispatched to a location in southwest Los Angeles. There's an unidentified adult male who's been the victim of multiple gunshot wounds.
The circumstances surrounding the shooting are still unclear. While the police conduct a criminal investigation, Julie conducts a death investigation. It is her job to document the forensic evidence found at the scene.
Forensics plays a very, very important role in what we do. Forensics is simply science applied to law, and it's an imperative component of death investigation. We use forensics to determine causes of death, to determine modes of death, time of death. We use it to verify a lot of information.
Several people in this place behind us, the 50 people standing in the yard that didn't see it.
The coroner investigator first gathers information about the incident from sheriffs and detectives on the scene.
Yeah, please let them know.
They also interview any potential witnesses.
Inside the barrier. Casing at 1, casing at 2, casing at 3, casing at 4.
It is her responsibility to positively identify decedents and to notify their next of kin. Julie photographs the body as part of her external examination. A crime scene photographer is also dispatched to the scene to document the entire area. Both sets of photos are kept on file. If requested, the coroner's photos are sent to the detectives to aid them in their criminal investigative process. While police collect any weapons found in the area, Julie gathers any personal effects left on or around the decedent, including any prescription medication or illegal drugs found at the scene.
There's a pipe right by his right hand there, cocaine pipe.
Oh, I see.
The investigators collect the crack pipe. It is sent to the forensic lab for testing. As detectives canvass the area looking for witnesses, Julie begins her examination of the body, turning and probing the victim, looking for any wounds or trauma. The first thing she notices is that the victim's body is already attracting insects, specifically ants and flies. Their presence may help determine the time of death. Brian Steinwand is one of the lead detectives for LA County Sheriff's Homicide Division.
In this case, our first thing we want to do is interview people as to what happened. Basically, most everyone said they didn't see what happened, see anything, they just heard gunshots.
One witness reluctantly came forward, but his stories and recollections continue to change.
He saw something and saw it all, and he cut his hand diving to the ground. Now it's, I don't know, nothing. We still need to interview him.
Okay.
The witness is escorted to the sheriff's office for further questioning.
Pronounced 2204 hours.
As Julie continues examining the body, she realizes the victim was shot multiple times and from many different angles.
That's a perimortem shot. So he's already dead or dying as he's going down, as he's getting that shot right there. There's very little tissue reaction to this grazing injury, and even less to the entrance wound.
A perimortem shot indicates the wound was received as the victim was dying. If the wound occurred prior to his death, it would have caused severe bleeding. When a wound occurs perimortem, the body's systems begin to break down. The heart rate slows, and the wounds do not bleed as much as the initial gunshot wounds.
So far, one to his abdomen, one right beneath the right nostril, goes in, fractures the upper mandible. There's a gunshot wound at the top of the head right here. Could be perimortem. Same weapon, or?
Row 380.
12 gunshot wounds, 2 graze.
The victim was shot as many as 12 times. In a preliminary search, investigators located 4 .38 caliber shell casings and 3 fired rounds near the body. The number of gunshot wounds led detectives to believe they may be looking for more than one shooter. With one witness headed back to the station, detectives and coroner investigators worked together to gather as much evidence for both the criminal and death investigations.
Well, they help us, obviously, with examining the body at the scene to help us try to piece together some of the initial parts of the investigation. They can tell us certain things that may or may not have happened regarding maybe the closeness of the shots or things like that. So it definitely helps us in the initial stages of the investigation, and then obviously at the autopsy we'll learn a lot more.
My job is to work hand in hand with those detectives and help them in that end by telling them how the person died. The details of where the shots were fired from, what type of injuries did they inflict, how many times was the decedent shot. I can give them lots of information that they are not necessarily trained to gather themselves.
They're all 380s, yeah.
Julie now focuses on identifying the body. By law, a coroner investigator has powers not granted to police officers. In the course of an investigation, they can open mail and examine personal property without first obtaining a search warrant. Julie has found a wallet on the body.
Maybe not.
But there is no identification, only a piece of mail and a possible address. She also found a phone number. It is Julie's hope that this information may lead to the victim's next of kin. But before any notification is made, an official positive ID must be obtained. The body is transported to the Forensic Science Center, located near downtown Los Angeles, where it will undergo further forensic tests. Here, the manner and cause of death will be determined. These details, coupled with the forensic information gathered by the coroner investigator, will aid law enforcement officials in their criminal investigation. Craig Harvey is the operations chief for the LA County Department of Coroner.
coroner's investigator is a death investigator, which is a slightly different tact than a police officer or a detective, which would be a criminal investigator. The coroner gets involved in deaths to conduct a death investigation. The police generally become involved because they need to conduct a criminal investigation in which a death has occurred. So statutorily, only the coroner is responsible for the actual death investigation.
On arrival, the body undergoes a preliminary examination where it is weighed and measured. A gunshot residue kit is administered. It collects trace elements left behind by a fired weapon. The body is also photographed with the case number already assigned on the scene. A forensic technician uses a fingerprint scanner to positively identify the victim and to research his background. The scanner sends a digital image of the fingerprints directly to the California Department of Justice in Sacramento. Inside of 60 minutes, the prints can confirm identification and check for any aliases or criminal record. Since investigators discovered a crack pipe near the body, there was a possibility the victim had a history of drug use. If he was ever placed under arrest, his prints would show up in the system. As Julie completes the forensic exam, she is called away to the second casualty of the evening. She will have to wait for confirmation of the gunshot victim's identity. Like all of her calls, Julie never knows what she may face when she arrives on the scene.
31 William to King Control.
What she does know is that each body tells a story. And as a coroner investigator, her job is to give each a voice. 1 a.m. and Los Angeles County Coroner Investigator Julie Wilson is arriving at the second call on her shift.
31 William clear.
She is waiting to hear identity confirmation for the first casualty, a multiple gunshot homicide she attended several hours earlier. When she arrives at the scene, a young woman in her 20s is lying motionless on the side of the road. She and her boyfriend were driving on the interstate after a date when they lost control and hit the divider. Julie begins the external examination, looking for anything out of the ordinary.
Basically, the coroner investigators are the eyes and ears of the forensic pathologist. We're responsible for investigating all sudden, unexpected, and unnatural deaths. So we investigate every accident, homicide, suicide, and a large portion of natural deaths as well.
In Los Angeles County, there are 60,000 deaths per year. Of the deaths they investigate, 10% are drug-related, 15% are homicides, another 8% are suicides. At the coroner's office, the gunshot homicide victim has been positively identified, and his name matches the one found on a piece of mail in the victim's pocket. The victim's fingerprints match a man on probation for a narcotics conviction named Robert Williams. Investigator Julie Wilson receives this information in the field. Her next step is to inform Robert Williams's family.
Hello, ma'am. This is Investigator Wilson with Los Angeles County. I'm looking for friends or family of a Mr. Williams. Mary? Mary, I do have some bad news for you. Robert was shot and killed this evening. Yes, ma'am. I'm so sorry. It was about 11:30 this evening. Paramedics attempted to resuscitate him, but they were not able to do that. He was pronounced on scene. Okay. I want you to keep my number, and if you can remember anything more, I want you to give me a call, okay? And I do extend my sincerest condolences to you, Mary. Okay? Okay.
The accident victim is transported to the coroner's office. There, Julie continues the examination she began on the body of Robert Williams hours earlier.
We caught rounds from all sides. Unclear whether it's from more than one weapon. All the casings and projectiles found were the same caliber. That doesn't necessarily mean there wasn't more than one weapon. So I don't know if the fact that he was shot from all different sides is to do with the fact that there's multiple shooters, or maybe he was just moving. It's difficult to tell without having any witness information to help us with that.
At the sheriff's department, detectives questioned the witness they brought in earlier in the evening. They hoped to gather information to confirm whether Robert Williams was shot by one or two gunmen. Although at the scene he said he saw the whole thing, he now was nervous and tentative. The eyewitness changed his story. He now claimed he saw nothing. Detectives needed to turn to forensic examiners for answers. At the crime lab, technicians dust the crack pipe found at the scene. Investigators hoped it might provide some clue that would lead to a suspect. But no usable prints are found. Julie Wilson continues to gather evidence and hopes she can reveal details of the events that led to the victim's death.
Examination of the gunshot wounds tells me that some of the wounds he received as he was dying and some after. He was dead, probably all within a matter of a few seconds.
Fingernail clippings and scrapings are collected for any substance that may later aid in the criminal investigation.
Possibly, if there was an altercation and there's some skin underneath the decedent's nails, they can compare that to a suspect if they get one at a later time.
She also collects samples of the victim's hair.
Now the hair standards,
When the shooting occurred, some of the victim's hair may have ended up on the killer's clothing.
so if there was a physical altercation,
His hair is collected for later DNA comparison.
suspect,
I think we've got to
Anthony Hernandez is the director of the Los Angeles County Department of Coroner.
What we look for in a good coroner's investigator is those skills and those attributes that are going to allow that person to look at a death scene and to look at a body and to be able to see it in a certain manner. Not necessarily in the way that, let's say, a police officer would look at it, but for what that particular scene and that particular body might be telling that person. And this is what the investigators do. They bring back this information, which is critical in determining exactly what steps need to be taken to figure out what's going to happen to a case.
The body is moved to forensic radiology for further examination. A real-time X-ray called a fluoroscopy is performed. Forensic technicians scan the images of the body, looking for bullets and slug fragments. Several bullet paths are found. A previously undetected bullet is spotted, lodged in the thigh. Los Angeles County Medical Examiner, Dr. Yulai Wang.
In this case, there were total 6 bullet fragments we have to recover during the autopsy. 2 in the head, 1 in the torso area, 1 in the pelvic area, 1 in the leg, and another bullet fragments in his arm. So we have total.
The X-rays will guide the medical examiner during the autopsy procedure.
And some other small.
Deborah Cowell, a gunshot expert, investigates more than 100 gunshot deaths a month. When a weapon is fired, gunshot residue particles may be deposited on the shooter or the victim. A gunshot residue kit is performed on all gunshot homicide victims.
If a firearm has been discharged, what happens is this cloud comes out, and what it contains is microscopic particles that are going to come from the bullet, they're going to come from the jacket if there's one present, but the particles we're most interested in are the particles that come from this area. This circular area here at the base of the cartridge is where the pressure-sensitive explosive is. And some of the particles that come out of that region are highly specific to the discharge of a firearm.
A gunshot residue kit can determine how close the victim was to the shooter when the weapon was discharged. It can also indicate whether or not the victim also fired a round.
So you could be in a room full of people and one person discharges the weapon, there could be gunshot residue on everyone.
Using a scanning electron microscope, she can locate the smallest traces of gunshot residue. This information can provide investigators with the shooter's location at the time of the crime. And it also can identify the caliber of the weapon.
Again, it's just a piece of the puzzle. It's not going to tell us the whole story. It's just going to give us a piece of information that can be helpful. It can corroborate a story or not corroborate a story.
Investigators need more information to support their crime theory that there may be two shooters using two different weapons. The body is transported to the autopsy room, where the bullets will be extracted from the victim. Los Angeles County Sheriff's Sergeant Randy Seymour attends the procedure.
There is some ballistic evidence inside the victim. One round has been recovered so far, which at least on the surface doesn't look like it matches the rounds that we recovered at the scene, which kind of adds to the theory that there may have been more than one weapon.
At autopsy, 6 bullet fragments were recovered, including the previously undetected bullet from the victim's thigh. All were sent to the ballistics lab. Examiners concluded 5 bullets came from a .38 caliber weapon. The slug found in the victim's thigh didn't match the others. Ballistics examiners determined it was from an old injury. The victim was not shot in the thigh on the night he was killed. The examination was unable to prove the investigators' initial theory that there were 2 gunmen. They would concentrate their efforts on finding a suspect who acted alone. Detective Randy Seymour knows the odds of catching the killer are slim.
People are not willing to talk. It's going to be very, very difficult to solve this case.
Each year, hundreds of homicides in Los Angeles County go unsolved. But the forensic evidence collected by coroner investigators helped bring the majority of the perpetrators to justice. Coroner investigator Julie Wilson conducts death investigations for the County of Los Angeles. The coroner's office is legally responsible for determining the cause and manner of death, positively identifying the decedent, and notifying the next of kin. In total, the coroner investigators of Los Angeles County are called to examine on average 28 deaths a day. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office performs autopsies on 15 to 30 bodies a day. Each year, the Los Angeles County Coroner investigates 20,000 sudden, violent, or unusual deaths. The bodies are brought to the Department of Coroner's Forensic Service Center, located near downtown Los Angeles. the largest such facility in the country. Hundreds of bodies are kept in its cooled storage rooms.
This is the first section of this side of the crypt. The bodies that are on the floor wrapped in sheet and plastic are awaiting an examination. The bodies that are on the shelves wrapped in rope and plastic have been autopsied and are waiting for someone to release them to a mortuary facility. We have bodies in different stages of decomposition here in the crypt. Some bodies come in decomposed, some bodies are here long enough to begin to decompose. When bodies decompose to the point where it begins to be a hazard to the workers here, then they're bio-sealed in another kind of wrap and then placed in long-term storage. This section here is the homicide crypt. This is where we keep all of our homicides that come in either from a hospital or from field calls.
On any given day, there are up to 300 bodies in the facility. The staff treats each with care and compassion. Director Anthony Hernandez.
And we want to treat that body with dignity and respect, because the way you can look at it is that if you were that person's mother or father or husband or wife or brother or sister, you would expect no less. And that's what we try to instill with our investigators, to make sure that these bodies are treated with dignity and respect.
Anthony Hernandez, along with the investigators in the field, is in a unique position to help family members cope with the sudden and tragic loss of a loved one. He takes pride in knowing his work provides comfort and closure.
After the families have been able to deal with the death, they have come forward and sent letters complimenting mainly the investigator who interacted with them in the field, complimenting them and saying that they were extremely understanding and compassionate.
We take that, suicide notes.
Among the type of deaths that fall under Los Angeles County Coroner's jurisdiction are suicides. Investigator Julie Wilson deals with suicides every day.
Those are some things that you're going to see pretty frequently. So I'm going to look for particular hemorrhages in his eyes. I'm going to...
And with each one, she attempts to unravel the mystery of why someone would take their own life.
The thing that intrigues me the most about suicides is that consistently the reason for the person taking their life, if it's expressed in a note or if they told family beforehand, is usually very simple. Something that you and I and the average person would think would be just an everyday problem, an everyday obstacle. But these people, for some reason, think that it's enough to end their life, enough that they have nothing to look forward to, nothing to live for. Some of the common things that I see are loneliness, retirement, health problems, but then even more commonly, you have relationship problems. Men and women kill themselves if their spouses leave them, if their spouses cheat on them. Young people kill themselves because their grades aren't good enough. The reasons are amazingly simple sometimes. And it always intrigues me why they can't just wake up the next day and try again. I feel so much pain. I can't take it anymore. This is no one's fault, but I feel there's no other option left for me.
If a death is ruled a suicide, no further investigation by law enforcement is required. But Julie still has a tough job ahead. Notifying the next of kin is one of the coroner investigator's most difficult tasks.
I do have to evaluate every scene before I notify the next of kin and approach every family with respect to their own personal situation. But for the most part, I try and handle everyone with the same compassion and respect. I think ultimately that's what they need, and regardless of the mode of death, someone who has just lost their grandfather in a natural heart attack can be just as devastated as someone whose 15-year-old son just drove their car over the side of a mountain in an act of suicide.
The goals of the coroner's office: to assist in solving crimes and aid families in their time of need. Our Responsibilities Chief Craig Harvey says the office makes every effort to meet every day.
We are able to help the families, and a lot of times it's something as simple as being at the other end of the phone when the family has a question or a concern, or they just want to talk. A lot of the people have either minor guilt feelings, or maybe they have very close feelings for the person that they just lost, and sometimes they just want to talk to somebody about how they feel about that particular person or who they were in their life.
Coroner investigators rely on photographs that document the entire process.
Are these overlapping ones?
That's
Are those
overlapping.
multiples?
Multiples, yeah.
James Navro is head of forensic photography.
Mostly surface street traffic.
I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've photographed probably 10,000 murders myself, in-house. So I've seen quite a bit of it. Well, you never get used to what you see here. You learn to just look at it from the perspective of trying to glean information to help put the bad guy away. That's how you keep your head on straight here, is you've got a purpose here, trying to help the investigation. So you have a tendency to look through these cases. I mean, it's difficult to look at anybody that's chopped up in little pieces and not react to it, but you learn.
The coroner's office supplies forensic services to 35 police agencies over 4,000 square miles in Los Angeles County. There are 50 coroner investigators. Each must learn to observe death down to the smallest detail.
The coroner investigator will see more dead bodies in a year than a lot of police detectives may see in a career. So they're more attuned to nuances and changes and similarities with bodies.
The coroner's investigators are critical to this whole process because they're the first on the scene. They're the ones that are going to be looking at those vials of pills and looking at those wounds as they first see them, looking at the position of the body, looking at what might be critical in giving us clues about what happened to that individual just prior to the death.
The coroner's office keeps track of more than 1,000 deaths on a central map.
This represents the homicide spread and traffic accident spread in the county of LA. Each of the red tags you see there represents a murder, a reported murder to us. The green dots are a reported traffic accident.
James Navro has yet to post 53 more murders and 28 traffic deaths that occurred in the last 2 weeks.
By January of next year, you won't even be able to see this area. That'll be solid red, all the way down to the beach.
911, what is your emergency?
Once again, the LA County Coroner's Office is called to a homicide in south central Los Angeles. And again, a red arrow is added to the map.
Well, I don't think the detective...
Los Angeles County Coroner Investigator Julie Wilson is called to her third death investigation of the day.
Has trauma in the head. They didn't tell us anything when they reported it, so I don't even know why she's dead.
The landlord of the South Central LA apartment complex discovered the body of a young woman, 29-year-old Nadine Jackson, after several of the tenants complained of a foul odor coming from inside. Neither Nadine nor her husband had been seen since Friday.
Okay, guys. It was reported as a domestic dispute that occurred on Friday. So that was about 4 days ago. I want to call my criminalist. I don't want to move anything until she comes.
Paramedics, homicide detectives, and crime scene technicians arrived at the two-story apartment building. Detective Barry Hall of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department is the lead detective in the case.
Deputies responded earlier today in regards to a body being found inside the residence, and the basic story surrounding this incident is that 4 days ago this female was last seen here at the residence, and her husband was seen the following day.
Police are looking for the victim's husband and believe he has fled the area. When a body is discovered, 911 operators dispatch paramedics and police to the scene. But no one can move the body until the coroner investigator arrives. Julie finds the woman wrapped in a blanket and hidden underneath a bed. The body was obviously decomposed, and investigators knew the cause of death would be difficult to determine. Once Julie arrived, she requested additional forensic experts to gather evidence and document the death scene.
For cases such as this, I request a criminalist and a photographer to accompany me to the scene. A criminalist will collect any trace hairs and fibers. If there's any ligatures on the decedent, my criminalist will collect that as well.
She also requests an additional photographer to record the entire scene. The apartment appeared to be relatively undisturbed, although the landlord moved the couch in order to locate the victim.
I briefly spoke to some people in this place outside, and apparently he's a pretty violent individual.
Crime scene technicians began to process the apartment. It was photographed from every angle. Technicians dusted for prints.
185. What is he?
Carpet, blanket, and other articles were collected as evidence.
Okay. As soon as,
Criminalists used a Luma light to detect bloodstains or spatter on the walls and floor. The alternate light source revealed pools of blood beneath the victim's body. Investigators believe the bleeding occurred post-mortem.
This office thrives on the collection of forensic evidence and applying that to death investigation.
With every piece of evidence gathered, investigators are one step closer to finding out how and why this woman was killed.
there was some kind of mark to the left side of his face.
Detectives from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Homicide Division questioned Nadine Jackson's neighbors and relatives. Witnesses told police they saw her husband leaving the apartment. His face was scratched. Detective Barry Hall was concerned about the welfare of the couple's children.
It's a mystery to us at this point. We have no idea where the kids were then and certainly don't know where they are now.
Julie needs to know more about the life of Nadine Jackson in order to uncover the events that led up to her death.
We don't have any next of kin information right now. I'm going to have to go through a lot of names and numbers in her address book. Most of them are written in Spanish.
The coroner investigator's duties require them to learn about the victim.
Looks like she was sort of a self-employed lady.
Because the body is so badly decomposed, Julie's ability to determine the cause of death is hampered.
Decomposition tends to mask trauma, so when you're doing an external exam, it's a bit more difficult to substantiate why someone has died. It's very difficult to tell how long they've been dead because everyone decomposes at different rates.
Did we see any structural damage inside
For the autopsy? Oh, yeah.
One way to determine how quickly the body is decomposing is by the temperature in the room. The higher the room's temperature, the faster the body decomposes. This information is used to estimate the time of death. In this case, the body has already adjusted to the room's temperature, which is 90 degrees, causing rapid decomposition. Investigators believed she had been dead for 4 days. As Julie conducts a preliminary examination, she notices trauma on the victim's hands, indicating Nadine Jackson may have fought back during a struggle.
Any of the nails look broken?
Thumbnails do. Both thumbnails look broken.
Eye gouging, maybe?
You know, feeling around for any fractures. Didn't feel any. It's a little difficult to tell on a decomposed body. It's in this advanced stage of decomposition as this one is. Because the head, the scalp feels a little spongy. There's a lot of air bubbles in there, so it's a little difficult to feel for fractures.
Investigators discover a brown belt wrapped tightly around the woman's neck and look for signs of strangulation. Normally, pinpoint-size hemorrhages are visible in the eyes of a strangulation victim. The tiny spots, called petechial hemorrhages, are the first indication of suffocation. Because the victim's eyes are so badly damaged, they look to a bone in the neck called the hyoid. Any fractures to that bone may indicate strangulation. Years of training have taught investigator Wilson to detach her feelings from each death scene.
You see it, you absorb it, you look for details. See, at that point, I'm in scientific mode. I try not to be in emotional mode. I can't do my job successfully if I'm in an emotional mode at that point. So what I'm doing at that point is I'm absorbing the scene as a whole. I'm looking for things that are out of place. I'm looking for inconsistencies, looking for evidence that might stand out to me that the detectives didn't see.
But even her years of training cannot prepare her for the more horrific acts of violence she encounters on her job.
And you're just forced to realize that some people's lives are like a nightmare. They're like a scary movie. They're like what you see on TV. Some people actually go through that kind of fear and terror that you see usually only on TV. The fact that that happens to real people never ceases to amaze me.
The body is finally prepared for transport to the coroner's facility.
Well, we're in the middle of the beginning, if that makes any sense. We have a lot more information than we did when we first arrived. Some of the pieces are starting to fit together a little, but we have a long ways to go. So we'll take her back to the office there. Tonight we'll do sexual assault kit, hair and nail standards. And then we have to hold off on the ligature till the morning. So we have to have a DME examine that area before we remove any ligature. Thanks, Teresa.
A young mother is dead, and investigators still don't know how she died. They must now look to the autopsy and forensic science to provide answers. A young mother was violently murdered in her Los Angeles home. Forensic examiners and detectives look to uncover the cause of her death. Julie Wilson is the lead coroner investigator on the scene.
Pieces are coming together as far as we have a little bit more information on the possible cause of death. The mode of death, even if we hadn't seen anything significant inside the residence, I would have gone ahead with the mode of homicide simply because the circumstances were suspicious.
The body of Nadine Jackson was brought to the Forensic Science Center near downtown Los Angeles. Due to the rapid decomposition of the body, the technician wears special biohazard gear to cover the mouth and eyes. Hair and fingernail samples are collected, looking for signs of a struggle. Witnesses reported that Nadine's husband was seen leaving the house with scratches on his face. At autopsy, forensic examiners concluded she had died of asphyxiation. She was strangled using a belt wrapped around her neck. A sexual assault kit was also performed. The results were inconclusive. Every body investigated by the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office must be positively identified. Investigators knew the advanced decomposition of the victim would make this difficult. An attempt is made to fingerprint the victim, but the skin on her fingers is so badly decomposed, it cannot be processed through the scanner. In the hopes of recording prints, the fingers need to be rehydrated. Forensic technician Jose Hernandez performs the procedure. The skin needed to be softened in order to lift the prints. A mixture of DMSO, a chemical solvent, methanol, and ethanol is injected into the fingers to bring the individual grooves and ridges back to the surface. Once softened, the fingerprints are easily lifted.
Man, very good, very good. I want to try to see the bridges between this magnified glass. I see excellent fingerprints for comparison in the driver license.
A positive match is found with a driving record at the California Department of Motor Vehicles, IDing the young mother. Now, Julie has the difficult task of notifying the family.
Notifying the next of kin never gets easier. I've been doing this for 5 years now, and every time I walk up to someone's front door, or every time I pick up the phone and call and tell someone, I still get butterflies in my stomach. It never gets easier.
Coroner investigators, like Julie Wilson, encounter a unique view of life and death that few of us will ever experience.
It's changed my notions about death in the respect that I didn't used to think about it much. Now I think about it quite frequently. And I think about death not so much as far as my own, but more so as just death in general and what happens to you when you die. Questions that everyone eventually asks themselves, but this job forces me to ask them maybe earlier in my life than I might have otherwise. It's a natural human trait to forget how much the people that are closest to you mean to you. But this job makes you remember every single day. That's makes me appreciate my life much more. And I think that I can go home every day and say that I feel like I'm good at my job. How do I know? I don't know if I am or not. I feel like I am.
Every day, it's the LA County Coroner Investigator's job to deal with death. They interview reluctant witnesses, talk to grieving families, and apply cutting-edge forensic science in the hope that they can make sense of the senseless deaths they encounter every day. A young Michigan woman accepts the job of a lifetime and disappears. Now it's the authorities' job to find her. The only clues are some suspicious emails and her new employer's shady past. In New York, an ambitious college student has her whole life ahead of her until she crosses the path of a killer. It's a random murder, the hardest kind to solve. But forensics reveals an unexpected pattern, leading to a game of cat and mouse with the prime suspect. Clues, eyewitnesses, police records. All of these help investigators. But each provides small consolation when the victim or the killer has vanished. In this program, some of the names have been changed. March 25th, 2000, Newport, Michigan. Call it a mother's intuition. When Carolyn Troughton received an email from her daughter Suzette, who'd moved out of state, it was supposed to reassure her. Instead, she called the police.
Police Tactical Operations, Anthony Burnell, may I help you?
The Overland Park, Kansas police dispatcher connected her with the missing persons unit. Mrs. Troughton explained that Suzette left for Kansas to work for a man named John Robinson. Suzette had packed her belongings and taken her dogs, promising to write or phone. But her mother hadn't heard from her in weeks, until she got the email that didn't sound like her daughter. Detective Greg Wilson of the Overland Park, Kansas PD was assigned the case. Experience told him it was not unusual for young people to move away from home and lose contact with their families. But Suzette, it seemed, was an exception.
Suzette would contact her mother by phone, as well as emails, at least 2 or 3 times a day. Since she had moved to Kansas, the contacts immediately dropped off. So that was of concern to Suzette's mother, as well as the fact that she said that there was never in Suzette's life more than 2 or 3 days at a time that Suzette would go without speaking with her mother.
When she left, Suzette, a nursing student, was excited by the opportunity to care for Robinson's elderly father. Police became concerned when they learned about her employer.
John Robinson was known to some of the investigators in Overland Park that had dealt with him back in the 1980s, and they knew that he had been a long-time career criminal.
In the 1980s, Robinson had been linked to several missing girls, but had never been charged with any crime connected to their disappearance. Investigators from the Overland Park Police wanted to gather all possible information about Suzette's whereabouts before confronting Robinson. Police went to her last known address, a motel.
I'm Detective Bobby Humholt with Overland Park Police Department. My partner Greg Wilson.
The clerk recalled Suzette because she had 2 little dogs, which weren't allowed.
She had a couple dogs.
Once Suzette was told about the policy, the clerk never saw the animals again. The clerk said Suzette's room was paid for by Robinson. He put the room on a business account from a company called Specialty Publications.
And there's your receipt, Mr. Robinson. Thank you.
Suzette stayed at the hotel for 16 days and had checked out on March 1st, almost 3 weeks earlier.
If you think of anything else, could you
The
please
clerk
give me a
provided the security camera tape from
you.
that date,
Thanks.
which provided investigators with a current picture of Robinson. Then detectives spoke with the housekeeper, who recalled that Suzette had occupied room 216.
Can you describe him to me?
She remembered that on the day the girl checked out, a man, matching Robinson's description, loaded her luggage into the back of a pickup truck. The housekeeper even described the truck and the luggage. The motel was Suzette Troughton's last known location, but it was located outside Overland Park's jurisdiction. The investigators brought in the Lenexa, Kansas Police Department to help them with this baffling case. Detective Wilson met with Sergeant Rick Roth of the Lenexa Police, sharing what he'd found at the motel. Wilson also told Lenexa PD that this was not the first time they had heard of John Robinson.
We had some good background information on John Robinson, and certain aspects of the disappearances of the girls in the 80s kind of meshed with the disappearance of Suzette.
In the previous cases of missing women, investigators could never find enough to prove their suspicions. And Robinson proved a difficult man to investigate.
The things that really didn't work in the 80s, going and talking to Robinson right away, what that did for him is it let him know that law enforcement was looking at him, that they were actively looking for these people that were missing.
Police believe this gave Robinson time to cover his tracks. Sergeant Rick Roth wanted to talk with the retired detectives who worked the earlier case.
We're going to give it a try. We brought them in, interviewed them. We had their official reports. However, we wanted to get a little further and get their personal views, what went correct in their investigations, what went wrong, their gut feelings, the little tidbits that were not in the police reports.
The more he learned about Robinson, the more Detective Roth began to fear he was running out of time if he hoped to find Suzette Troughton alive. The detective started by trying to track down Suzette's missing possessions.
555-3344.
They made cold calls to area mini storage companies,
Yes, hello.
looking for one that rented space to John Robinson.
Yes, thank you.
They found one.
Detectives went there as a punch key entrance, obtained the records, and found out he had actually been there on March 1st.
That was the same day Robinson checked Suzette out of the motel. Investigators next focused their attention on trying to find her dogs.
The family had told us that if we found Suzette's dogs, that something bad had happened to Suzette. They were like her children.
Officers used the same cold call technique and found Suzette's 2 dogs. They were adopted after being left at a shelter. Investigators now feared their missing persons case had become a homicide investigation.
When we did find the dogs, it was kind of confirmation on our feelings that she was, in fact, dead.
As police began to fear they might never find Suzette Troughton alive, all they could do now was work to try to find her killer before he struck again. As police continued the search for a missing girl in Kansas, they focused their attention on the man who had last seen her, a career criminal named John Robinson. Police wanted to keep a close watch on Robinson, but they didn't want to make him aware of their investigation. Sergeant Rick Roth.
From the lack of luck in the past interviewing John Robinson, we were not going to contact him. And basically, we threw every detective we had into the investigation.
Police put Robinson under surveillance. He was married and living with his family in a modest home. For seasoned investigator Don Lehman of the Lenexa Police Department, his habits seemed odd.
He would do activities during the day, mainly by himself. Would go and visit women that he had coming into town. He would meet them at hotels. Most of his activity during the day was outside of the family, whereas in the evening, he was generally home by like 4 or 5 o'clock, and was kind of, at that point, the family man.
Investigators collected his trash, hoping to find something incriminating. Something to link him to Suzette Troughton or to his cloudy past. Besides his residence, Robinson also owned a small farm with several houses on it. Detective Lehman photographed it.
Just to the right of the residence was a small shed, and next to the small shed were just looked like some junk, like some lawnmowers, barrels, things like that, just kind of overgrown area.
But a more immediate clue was coming together at the police station, where a bag of shredded documents was found among Robinson's trash. Strip by strip, detectives found their next leads. Phone records, credit card bills, and internet records. But one piece of evidence stood out.
We found a bill for a storage locker over in Raymore, Missouri. When investigators went over there to talk to the storage company, they were able to find that John Robinson actually had another locker there at that same site, but it was actually in one of the other victims' names.
At this point, all the police had were suspicions. They would need some hard evidence to secure a warrant to search the storage locker. They turned to his phone records for that evidence. The records indicated that he'd called Suzette hundreds of times, but not after he'd checked her out of the hotel.
Newport.
He'd also placed calls to several other women, including 2 in Canada.
Another one.
Some of these women were later found to have visited Robinson in Kansas hotels, as Suzette had done.
Ontario.
Every name we ran across associated with John Robinson, we looked at as potential victims.
5 a.m. right there.
The Suzette Troughton investigation began to suggest Robinson's larger pattern of criminal behavior.
Yeah, we got one over here I think you need to take a look at. Yeah,
We had no idea what their role in this entire game was. We didn't know if possibly they were accomplices in a disappearance of Suzette. We had no idea what their role was, and we couldn't contact them because we did not want to tip off John Robinson that we were investigating him.
Because the police still didn't want to tip Robinson off to the investigation, they enlisted help from Suzette's mother back in Newport, Michigan. She agreed to help them gather information about him by recording his phone conversations. She would keep calling him, demanding information about her daughter, hoping he would incriminate himself. But he was too slick. He told her that Suzette was traveling with another man, and he hadn't heard from her either. He never said anything that would help police. Robinson's story seemed unlikely, but the calls did appear to prompt a letter from Suzette, postmarked San Jose. Her mother remained unconvinced. Everything about it was wrong, from what Suzette said to the fact that it was typed. Again, Carolyn Troughton notified the police. Paul Morrison was the Johnson County, Kansas DA assigned to the case.
And these letters that are trickling in from Mexico, from California, talking about what a great time she's having with this new gentleman that she's taken up with. We didn't believe it for a second, but I think the point here is that, number one, we didn't know if we were ever going to find her body. We did believe that she was dead, and we knew early on that we were dealing with somebody that is much more sophisticated than your typical criminal.
It seemed John Robinson had a talent for getting away with his crimes, including the disappearances of 3 other Kansas women more than a decade earlier. From what investigators could tell, everything Robinson did was spun out of deceit.
He was a con artist. Most of his crimes involved financial crimes. He never worked for a business that he didn't rip off, and from what we could tell, he never met anybody he didn't rip off.
Just as police were beginning to fear they may never learn the truth about John Robinson, they got a call from a woman who had seen him for the man he truly was. In Kansas, Suzette Troughton is missing and presumed dead. Police fear the suspect, John Robinson, may be a serial killer, but they have no proof
We have to go find John.
until they receive a desperate call from a terrified woman.
Sexually assaulted in my room.
Robinson had lured her from Texas, and she now gave police some crucial information. Sergeant Rick Roth was one of the principal investigators.
Anybody named John Robinson.
The woman had gone to the office in a rather agitated state and asked who had rented the room that she was in. Management told her it was John Robinson. This woman knew him as James Turner. That further infuriated her, and she started yelling and screaming about the fact that she had been battered and that he had stolen from her.
Armed with this victim's statement, police finally had what they needed to confront John Robinson directly. When they arrived, he was home alone.
Mr. Robinson, a couple of things that we want to talk to you about.
They asked him about Suzette Troughton and other missing women.
I think I
He
want to
pled
talk about
ignorance.
Well, just hold it right there because actually you're under arrest. For what?
Investigators arrested him for battery and felony theft based on the Texas woman's statement. Search warrant in hand, a small army of detectives and crime scene officers descended upon Robinson's home. As the suspect himself was shuttled off for questioning at police headquarters. It appeared Robinson lured vulnerable women to Kansas with the promise of friendship, jobs, or exciting sex. He set his trap using email, so investigators confiscated his computers. Police also collected bills for storage lockers, credit card statements, and hotel receipts. Lenexa detective Dawn Lehman notes some of the other discoveries.
We recovered several books on creating new identities, make someone disappear, things like that. We recovered letterhead from the CIA, DEA, ATF. We even collected several pieces of information from some of the women from the early 80s that he had kept documents of or notes, probably to keep track of who he had spoken to with their families.
Missing was any evidence leading to Suzette Troughton. Investigators hoped to find it in his computers. Detective Mike Jacobson of the Overland Park, Kansas PD was assigned the task of analyzing the contents of Robinson's computers.
What they wanted us to look for were other victims. Are there other pictures of women or men on these computer systems, people that we don't know about? And in fact, we did find some of those types of pictures. They wanted to know about communications. Were there communications between John Robinson and others, specifically Suzette Troughton and other victims as they were identified?
Investigators determined that the email supposedly sent by Suzette to her family in fact originated from John Robinson's email account. That suggested that Robinson himself had sent them. Police hoped for a more substantial link in Robinson's storage units.
I don't know if at that point we ever thought that there was actually, bodies or anything in the storage lockers, but we felt that there was something that would connect him to these missing women.
They weren't disappointed. Investigators found Suzette's luggage, her computer, clothing, identification, and other personal possessions.
Here's Suzette's driver's license and her social security card. Get that?
More incriminating was a stack of stationery pre-signed with Suzette's signature. It was accompanied by a list of addresses and birthdays of Suzette's friends and family. This was the first real indication that Suzette was dead. But if police were going to prove she had been murdered, they had to find her body. Investigators started at the place Robinson knew best, his own farm. Cadaver dogs led officers through the brush and right to a pair of large barrels. Detectives meticulously broke the seal on one of them. Inside, they found a body.
Got her.
The second barrel also contained a body. They now had proof that John Robinson was a killer. Detective Greg Wilson of the Overland Park, Kansas PD.
We don't deal with a lot of murders, thank goodness. When you become a police officer, you hope that you never have to deal with a situation like this. You know, the whole thing was almost overwhelming.
Now, investigators had to determine what had happened to these victims and who they were. It was an enormous challenge. One they presented to Shawnee County, Kansas Deputy Coroner Donald Poyman.
Normally, the bodies come in a sealed body bag, and we know how to examine the bodies. In this case, just deciding how to get the bodies out of the barrels and preserve the evidence was a very tricky situation. Not only because of the logistics of them being extremely heavy, but we had a lot of tissue that had liquefied.
Poyman determined that both victims were young females, and both were killed by a hammer strike to the skull. One had been dead about a month, the other up to 2 years. Upon learning that the bodies had been found on his land, Robinson asked to speak with his lawyer. Investigators respected his request, but not before showing him the room full of evidence they had gathered against him. It included photos of his victims, maps, and surveillance logs. Investigators believed it was finally Robinson's time to wait. After months of investigating suspected serial killer John Robinson, authorities in Kansas finally had him in custody. From the local jail, he and his lawyer were trying to find a way to prove his innocence.
I've been arrested for sexual battery.
So far, the only charges against him were battery and larceny related to the woman from Texas. But with 2 bodies found on his property, Sergeant Rick Roth was determined not to stop until he had brought this man he believed was a cold-blooded murderer to justice. Robinson had slipped away once before. This time, he would not get away.
This was a huge case, biggest case ever worked at Lenexa as far as manpower and time. For 2.5 months, we threw every detective we had into it. And then after Robinson was arrested, I mean, it had increased to like 35 detectives working this case. It was a huge strain on manpower.
Investigators focused their attention on the evidence. Their first job was to identify the victims found on Robinson's farm. Dr. Daniel Winter, forensic odontologist, was asked to assist with the identification.
In the case of Suzette Troughton, we were provided ante-mortem charts and x-rays by her treating dentist. I took x-rays and charted and took photographs also.
If Winter could match the 2 sets of x-rays, then he could say with certainty that investigators had found the body of Suzette Troughton.
We see fillings that are identical between the ante-mortem and the post-mortem x-rays. These are enough points to make a positive identification.
Dental records proved that one of the victims was Suzette Troughton. Investigators also ID'd the other victim as a woman who had been reported missing. They then focused all energy on connecting Robinson to Suzette's murder. They began by studying the letters Suzette's mother had received. Here, too, the tale would be told in the lab. At the Kansas City Police Department, Chief Criminalist Frank Booth extracted DNA from Suzette's body. He hoped to compare it against cellular material pulled from the envelopes that Suzette supposedly sent her family. He wanted to see who had actually sent the letters.
If I can detect that underneath the flap of the envelope, I can then know that I've got an indication I've got saliva. In addition to that, you also slough off epithelial cells from the inside lining of your mouth. These cells are very distinctive in their appearance, and they also contain the DNA that can identify who licked the envelope.
It wasn't Suzette Troughton. The DNA on the envelopes matched a sample taken from John Robinson. He must have sent the letters to avoid arousing suspicion about Suzette's fate. Robinson's connection with Suzette was linked at a molecular level. Hair and blood cells found in Robinson's storage unit were consistent with Suzette's. And a fingerprint on Suzette's driver's license belonged to Robinson.
I believe Suzette Troughton thought she had the opportunity of a lifetime when she traveled down here. She was supposed to get a salary of $65,000 a year, a leased car. She was supposed to stay in a 5-bedroom mansion. She was going to travel the world with John Robinson and his elderly father, which was supposed to be her job, was taking care of him.
She never saw it coming. It couldn't be disputed. John Robinson murdered Suzette Troughton and several other women. The evidence had finally caught up with him. It was a fact that did not surprise DA Paul Morrison.
John Robinson had been killing people for over a decade and a half, and he'd never been caught. He knew he'd been investigated at least a time or two for that, and he'd always beat it. So I think to a certain extent, there's a certain amount of arrogance that comes into play, and John Robinson is a very arrogant man.
But John Robinson could not outsmart the evidence. He was charged with 2 counts of capital murder and 1 count of first-degree murder. He received the death penalty. John Robinson crafted elaborate schemes to get close to his victims. And in the end, this lethal proximity made it impossible for him to hide. But when the killer is a stranger who strikes and then vanishes, he or she can become nearly invisible. New York, a city of glamour and grit, a town of dreams and all too often harsh realities. In June 1998, a woman on her way to work can't believe what she sees. A body lies across the stairwell of her East Harlem apartment building. The woman called police. The NYPD and an emergency medical team arrived within minutes. But there was no emergency. It was clear that the young woman had been dead for some time. Investigators determined she had been sexually assaulted. And with no identification, that was all they knew about her. Homicide detective Rob Mooney had his work cut out for him.
We weren't sure if she lived in the building that she was found in, and because of the lack of obvious trauma, there was no real cause of death obvious at the scene.
Investigators would have to wait for the autopsy to determine how she died.
The detectives that initially responded to the scene carried it as what we call an investigate DOA, because there was no cause of death known to them and nothing obvious, and there wasn't anybody at the scene telling us what happened to this woman.
At the medical examiner's office, the autopsy confirmed that the victim had been sexually assaulted. The technicians performed a rape kit and collected DNA evidence in the event they identified a suspect. The autopsy also showed that her death was not an accident.
The medical examiner's office gives us the cause of death as asphyxiation due to chest compression, meaning that somebody or something was heavy enough or exerted enough pressure on her chest to cause her to be unable to breathe.
Police went back to the apartment building and canvassed the residents to find out if anyone knew anything about the girl. No one had seen or heard anything suspicious. And no one had ever seen the girl before. Then, investigators got a call from a woman who was worried that her daughter was missing. Police spoke with the mother. She told them her daughter's name was Rashida Washington. She described Rashida as an ambitious 18-year-old who was working to put herself through college. Police now had a name to try to match with the victim.
The police department has a unit that's assigned to the medical examiner's office, missing persons unit that works there. And when they get a report of a missing person, they normally through course normal business, will match up missing persons reports with unidentified remains. And that was how the identification was made.
We have a victim.
The woman found murdered was Rashida Washington,
Young lady over on 720 West.
but no one knew how she ended up dead in the building.
Washington.
It was several blocks from her home
She was identified. She works
and wasn't
late.
anywhere near her college campus.
She was going to New York City Community College. Could you check on that? Get the.
Investigators went to the school she attended.
Hey, how's it going? Good.
They pored over her class lists, looking for someone who could connect her to the building where she was found.
Looks good, man. Thanks.
They could find no link. There seemed to be no logical reason for her to be in that building. Next, they went to the dress shop where she worked.
Good. Can we talk to the manager, please?
They hoped that possibly the manager could shed some light on the mystery of what happened to Rashida Washington.
Well, the last time I saw
The manager told them that Rashida stayed late
It was my,
and did not mention any plans she had made after work.
We found out that she had left work, I think about 9:30 at night, the last day that she was alive, and as far as anybody could tell, took the train as she normally did, and then never made it home.
Police hit another dead end. Investigators again turned to those closest to Rashida.
It's important to find out who's responsible. We can't give it a slow approach. It's got to be done right, and it's got to be done as quickly as possible to try to prevent further crimes from being committed.
They were trying to find out if she had any enemies,
We won't talk about that.
anyone she was arguing with, or if she was mixed up with the wrong crowd.
Her family and friends and co-workers were shocked to find out that she had been the victim of a murder. She was not the kind of person that you would normally find in this position.
Desperate for answers, Rashida's family and friends posted flyers throughout the neighborhood.
Clearly, because we had no real lead to work on at that stage of the game, and you have to start with her, and you start to talk to all the people around her, and then that circle begins to expand as you go on to see if we can find out exactly what happened to her. Rashida's case was pretty much of a mystery.
With no information to go on, the Rashida Washington rape and murder investigation faltered. Then, 3 months later, police confronted another case of rape. This time, the victim survived. She accused a resident of her apartment building. The man was arrested and imprisoned for the crime. But in this case, investigators may not have gotten the right man. In New York City, police are struggling to solve the murder of 18-year-old Rashida Washington. They believe that they have their suspect behind bars. But cutting-edge science is about to point the investigation in a new direction. In 1998, state and federal crime labs were setting up DNA databases for criminal cases. While adding the DNA from the perpetrator of the second rape into the database, the lab made two crucial and totally unexpected discoveries. First, the man imprisoned for the crime was innocent. And second, the real culprit had also raped and murdered Rashida Washington.
Match with your homicide case.
Homicide detective Rob Mooney.
The linking of the two cases through DNA was huge for us. That was a huge break. It did not, at that point, tell us who the perpetrator was, but it did tell us that there was at least one person responsible for at least two cases. And it gave us a lot more material to work with. because we have a live victim now. We have somebody that's seen the person that killed Rashida Washington can still tell us about.
Most of the IDs were made by something else.
But the information from the database did not stop there. It appeared to Karen Dooling, who was an assistant director at the DNA lab for New York City's medical examiner, that the rapist who had turned murderer had been on a spree.
Originally, you had these two investigations that were thought to be completely separate, and one of those investigations was even thought to be part of a completely separate pattern, and how these two cases linked together. And as time went on, within the next year or two in the laboratory, cases continued to link to this pattern, cases that people had no idea were this same perpetrator or that were linked to each other.
From interviews with the surviving rape victim, police developed a sketch of the suspect. It was widely circulated around the college Rashida attended and throughout the city. The investigators' hard work paid off. A woman called with an anonymous tip.
She's pretty certain that the person in the sketch is somebody that lives in her building on East 111th Street. She supplies us with the address of the building and a nickname, Ace, that she's picked up from having had contact with this person in the building. So the detectives then begin to search our databases for people at that address using that nickname.
It brings them their first suspect, a man named Aaron Key, who had a record for robbery, weapons possession, drugs, and other crimes.
There we go.
He resembles the sketch. In addition, the surviving rape victim provided another piece of crucial information. According to prosecutor Rich Plansky,
at the crime scene, the perpetrator discarded a sweatshirt and a baseball cap. She was positive that the person who raped her was wearing both. And as it turned out, the sweatshirt had a partial laundry tag on the back.
following the only real clue they had, investigators approached dry cleaners near Key's apartment.
Tell me, sir, do you recognize that tag?
One cleaner recognized the distinctive tag as coming from his establishment. He handed over his client list.
That's a copy.
Key's mother was on it.
Thank you very much. Give you a card. If you,
In addition to the woman in the building telling us that this is the person that she thinks is responsible for these crimes, we identify who that nickname belongs to, and we have that same person perhaps being the owner of this shirt that's left behind at the rape. So it becomes a fairly intense surveillance on Aaron at this stage of the game. We're watching him 24 hours a day in an effort to try to secure something that will yield a DNA sample. If he smokes a cigarette and throws it on the ground, if he spits out gum and throws it on the ground, if he drinks a soda and throws the bottle in the garbage, get it.
Aaron Key does none of those things. He always seems to be one step ahead of them. But police get lucky when he stumbles.
So we fill out a wanted card for Aaron Key, which means that if he gets arrested any place else in New York City, we'll get notified immediately so that we can do whatever we need to do with this person. And what happens is Aaron gets arrested in Midtown North for an attempted petit larceny.
Believing this is their chance to finally get a DNA sample, police tell Key they need to swab his cheek to test for TB before they lock him up.
But the problem here is, in order for us to be able to use that legally, he had to sign a release that clearly states this is going to be typed for DNA and it's going to be put into the medical examiner's data bank. The second that he read that, he was like, nah, you know what? He goes, I joined Jehovah's Witnesses recently, and I don't think I can do this until I consult with the elders in my church, and that was the end of that.
Not quite the end. Though Key did all he could to conceal his DNA, The authorities stayed one step ahead. They kept a close eye on him in prison, and a guard collected coffee cups from Key and adjacent inmates.
All of them are tested for DNA. All of them produce DNA, but one of them produces DNA that matches the evidence in all of these cases.
Investigators believed that Aaron Key was the assailant in all 5 cases. They simply had to match his DNA to the DNA in the database. But because of the huge number of records on file, that would take time. Time the investigators did not have. With only a petty larceny charge against him, police had to let him go. They try to keep him under surveillance, but he manages to slip away.
We have no clue where he is at this stage of the game. So now it becomes kind of a media blitz the next day. His picture is on the front page of the newspapers because that very morning that he disappears is the day that we get the DNA match back. So he's our guy.
Rapist, killer, escape artist. Aaron Key is on the loose, and he could be anywhere. In New York, DNA has linked 34-year-old Aaron Key to 5 rapes and 2 murders, but the suspect has fled. Detectives kept an eye on his apartment for days just in case he returned. Then, late one night, a light went on. Police wasted no time. But the man inside was not Aaron Key. It was his roommate. Key wasn't there and hadn't been there for days. His roommate didn't know where he was. But at that instant, the phone rang.
That's all right. Now answer it for me, please.
The roommate picks up the telephone, and I could tell just by the look on his face that it was Aaron that was on the phone. I said, give me the phone. They said, you got to come in. Every cop in New York City's got your picture right now.
Key agrees to meet with Detective Mooney to turn himself in.
He says, but I don't want to step out and have 100 cops jumping on me. He says, I just want you by yourself, meet me in the street. So I go, okay, no problem. I said, but make no mistake about it. Don't come in the block with your hands in your pockets or we're going to have a problem.
Police don't want to play any games with Key, and they get his cell phone records to try to pinpoint where he was making the call. They want to pick him up before he has a chance to run again. But they are too late.
While I'm having this conversation with him where he's telling me that he's on a number 6 train on his way uptown to come and turn himself in, he's actually at Penn Station in Newark, New Jersey.
Police then set about using credit card and phone records to try to find Aaron Key. The trail leads them south.
I call up our tech people and I say, listen, dump this phone right now, meaning the phone that was the receiving end of that telephone call. We have that number. I want all the phone calls that came in between these 2 time periods. They determined that this telephone call came from a phone booth in downtown Miami. The next morning, myself and another detective were on a flight.
After arriving in Florida, police tracked down the phone booth Key used. It was located directly in front of a hotel.
We pull into the parking lot and we're setting up and we're figuring we're going to be here all day sitting here watching this hotel to see what happens. And not 5 minutes later, here comes Aaron walking down the street and he's with a young girl. So I'm thinking, this is bad. This is like victim number 9 walking right past us here.
3 p.m.
New York detectives, accompanied by Miami police and SWAT team, descended upon the hotel and sealed the exits.
Let's go upstairs.
They've got Key trapped, along with all of the other guests and hotel staff. law enforcement swept the hotel, room by room, in search of the elusive key.
We have an emergency. For your own safety, we need you to clear the building right now.
At last, they find him. Key puts up no resistance, and the girl is safe. If police hadn't found him so quickly, the girl might have become his next victim. Their quick reactions probably saved her life. Key was extradited to New York, where he spent several hours denying his involvement. Even in the face of scientific evidence, investigators needed to find a way to get Key to talk. And one of them suggested that maybe his girlfriend could get him to confess. Against Detective Mooney's better judgment, Key's girlfriend was allowed to see him.
And he spills everything. He admits to every one of the crimes. And of course cannot offer an explanation for why he did it, just that he did do it. This all becomes good, usable evidence for us at trial, because it was unsolicited. She wasn't sent in there as an agent of the police for any reason. In fact, I argued that she shouldn't go into the room.
Though Aaron Key had girlfriends, he was a sexual predator who enjoyed taking women by force. Rashida Washington lived in the same building as Key. She must have known him. And in his mind, because she could recognize him, she had to die. Rich Plansky was the prosecutor.
The case wouldn't have been solved without forensic evidence. Forensic evidence did three things in this case. Number one, it identified Aaron Key for us. Because he left his DNA on 5 of our 7 victims, in the end, it told us this was the right guy. Number two, it exonerated a number of innocent people, 2 of whom had been arrested and identified in lineups for 2 of the rapes. And number 3, it was instrumental in helping us convict Aaron Key and putting him away for the rest of his life.
Key was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
The bottom line is this person is off the board forever. You won't see him anymore. And had he not been taken off the board, more crimes would certainly have been committed.
A killer's motivation remains a mystery, but the residue of his crime lingers. Thanks to the tireless work of forensic scientists, when a murder occurs, it is impossible for the killer to simply vanish.